You're listening to Speaking of Health and Wellness, the podcast, where we dive into holistic nutrition, biomedical treatments, functional medicine, low toxicant living, and developmental strategies with a special focus on children with complex picky eating, developmental delays, and neurodevelopmental disorders. I'm your host, Shandy Laskey, integrative speech-language pathologist, pediatric feeding specialist, functional nutritional therapy practitioner, and epidemic answers certified health coach. Together, we are changing the conversation around how we view, discuss, prevent, and treat these childhood epidemics. I am so honored to have your time and attention today. Thank you for joining me and for all of your support. Please note that this podcast is for educational purposes only and should never be misconstrued as medical advice or a replacement for individualized care from your trusted providers. Now, without any further ado, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Speaking of Health and Wellness, the podcast. I hope that you're doing well and that you're having a great day. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning to the podcast, it's great to have you back. I appreciate your support and taking the time out of your day to listen and learn with me. And in episodes 1 and 2, I shared my story about how my chronic illness was the catalyst to my career change and how my own health and wellness journey ultimately is what led me to learning about autism spectrum disorders, which you'll hear me refer to as ASDs as well throughout this podcast to abbreviate, as well as other neurodevelopmental disorders, which you'll hear me refer to as NDDs, are a whole body condition. These are whole body conditions. Additionally, the children who I previously described in my last episode as complex picky eaters, who oftentimes have this biochemical, nutritional, medical, these underlying components that are related to their self-restricted, self-limited eating habits, whether it's the chicken or the egg, though, is dependent on each kid. These are also whole body conditions. Sometimes in picky eating, it's the chicken or the egg theory is like, is the picky eating because of a deficiency, or is there a deficiency because of the picky eating? Can be both rather than one or the other, potentially. But I plan to talk more about complex picky eating in the future content, of course, but today I'm going to really focus in on autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders as whole body conditions. You may hear me say NDDs, like I said, because it becomes quite a mouthful. If you listen to episodes 1 and 2 about my own health journey, you heard all about how I learned about how these conditions were whole body conditions. And as a recap, for those of you who may not have heard those 2 episodes, along with my own health and wellness journey, I had 2 integrative providers that I saw who really were kind of the change in direction for my health and wellness journey. They were pretty pivotal in my own journey. One of them was a naturopathic doctor, and the other was a registered nurse who was also a nutritional therapy practitioner. And their offices were side by side, and I had back-to-back appointments with them. And the first or second appointment, it had to have been the first one, they both asked me what I was studying. It was just like part of the intake process. They were just getting to know me, and as I told them that I was becoming a speech-language pathologist, they both encouraged me to look into autism as a whole body condition. And that completely changed the trajectory of my career, of my life. It's led me to understanding other conditions, demographics of children and adults that I would serve as a speech-language pathologist, but also it's really helped me just understand this idea of total load and body burden and more underlying biochemistry and these different connections and the gut-brain connection. And it's just helped me understand a lot of other conditions on a much deeper level as well. So just as a heads up for transparency purposes, the notes and the outline for this podcast, I'm pulling directly from my own blog from speakingofhealthandwellness.com, exploring autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders as whole body conditions, same title as the podcast. I wrote this blog back in 2019, and while I know it's a really good blog and it's very in-depth, I know that these days people they just aren't reading blogs as much as they used to. So I figured I would repurpose this into a podcast for you to listen to and multitask or whatever you're doing while you're listening to podcasts. I know I'm usually multitasking. But it's good content, and it's basically exactly where I wanted to go with the podcast as we move forward. So I figured we would just repurpose this and work smarter, not harder. All right. So after you've listened, if you are interested in learning more about the topic, I do encourage you to go check out the blog on speakingofhealthandwellness.com. I'll leave it in the show notes below, because it has a lot of sources and studies cited throughout, as well as different graphics and visuals that I've created that have, the idea was to help make the information a bit more digestible. So if that's something that you're interested in, I'll leave the link in the show notes below. But for now, let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? I'm going to continue to keep building on this topic across Speaking of Health and Wellness, meaning my website, the social media content, the podcast content, just across the content. I really am going to keep building on this topic because I think that it's so important we continue to bring the awareness for these children and individuals and their family, not only for those on the autism spectrum, but children who have other neurodevelopmental disorders and developmental delays, what have you, as well. But for now, before I get too ahead of myself, let's just get into the foundational information about autism spectrum disorders and other NDDs as whole body conditions. I hope that this podcast and this accompanying blog will be a good starting point to help you maybe reshift your perspective or further develop your perspective of autism and these other conditions in general. So, autism spectrum disorders, they're referred to as a spectrum to reflect the vast varieties of skills and symptoms of each individual, while also sharing similarities. Most autism researchers agree that we are just now beginning to be able to recognize different subtype groups of individuals on this autism spectrum based on causes and treatments and related commonalities. There's a quote in the world of autism: if you've met one child or one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. That's Dr. Stephen Shore. But what he means by that is, don't think you know what autism looks like just because you've met one or a few or, a couple individuals or children on the autism spectrum. I've personally worked with children on the spectrum for over a decade. I fully agree with this quote in a number of ways. Since you're here, you may already know the common symptoms and signs of autism spectrum disorders, but just in case you don't, let's just go ahead and review them very briefly. According to the DSM-5, the diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorders are based upon symptoms and traits that include persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts, restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, and symptoms cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of current functioning. For some perspective, In the 70s, 80s, it was said to be at 1 to 5 in approximately 10,000 children would have autism. According to CDC data, autism spectrum disorders now currently impact 1 in 36 children or 1 in 59 children, depending on which CDC data you choose. The point is that we are at epidemic rates that are they're not sustainable for our families, for many of these families, for our nation, and for the world, if we are trying to truly help support these children and individuals and their families to obtain the resources and supports that they need access to. Some people argue that the rise in diagnosis can be attributed to better diagnosis, earlier diagnosis, or changes in the diagnostic criteria. And I find this to be oversimplified and relatively dismissive. As a pediatric SLP, I will be the first to admit that I have witnessed some overdiagnosis, but the reality is that a change in or increased identification of ASDs cannot account for even half of the increased rates that we've seen over time, not only across the country, but across the world. In a study published in Epidemiology in 2009, they showed that earlier diagnosis and changes in diagnostic criteria only accounted for approximately 1/3 of the increase in the total rates of children being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders. And you have to ask yourself, okay, if we are experiencing this overdiagnosis, maybe that child wouldn't, in your mind, if you think it's an overdiagnosis or a reach of a diagnosis, they might not fit perfectly into the category of autism spectrum disorder, but obviously there's enough going on with that kiddo where there are concerns about their development enough to pursue an evaluation for autism. So, even if they are being given a diagnosis and maybe it is, let's say, a increased diagnostic situation here, if it's an overdiagnosis, there's still something going on. So there's an increase of something going on. And remember, we're talking about a spectrum, right? When I am faced with the "it's better diagnosis" response, I really like to bring it back to the bigger picture, where we're talking about the rates of chronic illness in children and adults across the board have increased significantly in the last 2 to 3 decades. Over half of children and millennials in the United States today have a diagnosed chronic health condition. It's at 54%. With this information, we can reflectively say that our society at large is experiencing a health crisis. Autism spectrum disorders are just one type of neurodevelopmental disorder. In NDDs, the brain and the nervous system are impacted during critical development periods, and they're often diagnosed before the child enters preschool. Currently, the rates of neurodevelopmental disorders in the United States are 1 in 6 children. These are neurological conditions where the biology of the body has a direct influence on the brain, and it's a bidirectional relationship. So vice versa. It has an impact on their mood, their overall health, and their overall functioning. Other examples of neurodevelopmental disorders that are on the rise in addition to autism spectrum disorders and sometimes are overlapping with include, but are not limited to, the following that I'm going to list. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, which are currently, we're looking at approximately 1 in 10 U.S. children has ADHD. Communication disorders, including childhood apraxia of speech, speech sound disorders, speech language disorders, childhood onset fluency disorders, and social pragmatic communication disorders. Global developmental delays, intellectual developmental disorders, specific learning disorders, and there are more. For so long, the mainstream thought was that ASDs and NDDs were just brain-based psychological disorders primarily caused by genetics or really major environmental factors, maybe, if there's sufficient evidence and common knowledge. For example, like most people today know that smoking is bad for you, that smoking can cause birth defects and other issues, right? We know that now. But once upon a time, there were doctors smoking in their office recommending it to people, okay? So I believe we are going to continue to see more developments that elucidate this idea of total load and the total toxic body burden and these epigenetic factors where we're thinking about the genetic predispositions and the blueprints in combination with the environmental factors that are at play that then express the symptoms of these conditions. So I don't believe, clearly you can probably tell that I don't believe that these are just purely brain-based psychological disorders caused primarily by genetics. These are whole body conditions that relate to epigenetic changes that have happened, whether that's generational or within that child's specific lifetime, what have you. There's so much that goes into it. Everything is everything. And it just, there's a lot that goes into it. And that's why it's so complex. And that's why it's so difficult to study. Because there's no one environmental factor. There's no one cause. There's no one treatment modality or substance or supplement or diet that just, helps all kids. It's all individual. So many people still do believe this, what I believe is an outdated ideology. Emerging literature continues to demonstrate, though, that these are biochemically influenced conditions all the way down to their molecular levels. It is no coincidence that the rates of autism have correlated with the rise of other neurodevelopmental disorders and chronic diagnoses, chronic health conditions. And many of those children and individuals on the spectrum have underlying co-occurring neurodevelopmental disorders and or other chronic health conditions as well. And that's what I want the key points and the takeaway from this to be, from my work in general, that these are whole body conditions. And when we address their underlying health challenges, these children make many improvements in their health and their wellness and their development. So let's just pause here for a moment and think about this. If a person is impacted at the molecular level, they're impacted on the cellular level. And what are your tissues and your organs made of? Cells. When cells are impaired, organs are impaired, systems become impaired, and whole body systems are becoming impaired. These are whole body conditions that deserve attention accordingly. It is no longer a secret or a surprise that children and individuals with autism spectrum disorders, it's no longer a secret that they have generally poorer health outcomes compared to their neurotypically matched peers. And we need to start asking ourselves more about that, especially those kiddos who are really complex picky eaters, because those are the kiddos where you might have a parent that's like, yeah, Shandy, I hear you, I get it, I know, I wish my kid would eat healthier food. I know my child probably has a deficiency, but they're so picky. They only want to eat pizza and chicken nuggets and waffles and all these processed foods. There is so much hope to changing diet and lifestyle, and it is just really important to not stop trying, even when kiddos are super, super picky and it's really complex. Just start small and do what you can. We'll get into some action steps later. But here are some of these co-occurring conditions that have been found to be overlapping in children with autism and also other co-occurring conditions. So ADHDs, communication disorders, feeding disorders, sleep disorders, epilepsy and seizures, asthma and respiratory conditions, eczema, chronic ear infections, anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, PANS-PANDAS conditions, gastrointestinal disorders, autoimmune conditions, food allergies and intolerances and sensitivities, environmental and chemical intolerances and sensitivities, and more. The rates of these comorbidities are certainly further evidence that elucidates that these conditions are whole body conditions. And what are their overlapping and underlying commonalities that these conditions share? Here are some of the commonalities between all of the conditions that I just listed. Genetic predispositions like MTHFR and so much more. MTHFR is just a very popular, known polymorphism SNP, but there's many more. Sensitivities to environmental stressors, impaired detoxification, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, poor digestion, dysbiosis of the gut, intestinal hyperpermeability, aka leaky gut, systemic inflammation, nutritional deficiencies, immune dysfunction. And you might be wondering, what has changed? Why? Why are we experiencing this global explosion of these epidemics? In the words of Richard Louv, the health of children and the health of the earth are inseparable. Again, genetics alone cannot account for the dramatic increase of child chronic health epidemics, not just childhood, but the chronic health epidemics across the board for children and adults. There is no way to candy coat this, my friends, but we live in an increasingly toxic world. When you're walking through the store, most of us assume if it's something on the shelf in the store, it's probably safe, but that's not necessarily true. We live in a country that doesn't exercise the precautionary principle here in the United States, which implies that if there are any risks to public health or the environment, it's best to avoid and not release that product or ingredient. That's the precautionary principle. But instead, the US has allowed thousands upon thousands of inadequately tested chemicals into our country and our world. Over the past few decades, there have been over 80,000 man-made chemicals put onto the market today that have not been adequately tested for human and environmental safety. And I am not trying to scare you with this, but consider all of that, plus essentially the infinite possibilities that these chemicals could have on each of our own unique bio-individuality. And now think about the fact that we don't know how all of these substances interact with our biology and or the synergistic interactions of each other. That's only considering man-made chemicals. That's not accounting for our lifestyle factors, as well as the agricultural, medical, and birthing practices that have significantly changed over the course of our last 100 years, just generally speaking. We are being impacted epigenetically in so many ways. Our environment, food, and lifestyle decisions impact our gene expressions and our overall health. These epigenetic impacts are observed as the symptoms and conditions that we see rising. I don't want all of this to be gloom and doom. So I want to leave you with some action strategies and thoughts about what we can do for our families in the world. And first and foremost, that is start with what you can control rather than aiming for perfection. As you start learning more about holistic nutrition and low toxicant living and this different type of lifestyle where you're being very conscious and mindful about what you're putting into and on your body, it can be very easy to fall into a perfectionism trap and think that you need to change everything right now, today, overnight. And that's not realistic. And I'm telling you, especially if you've got a kiddo who's a complex picky eater, that's super unrealistic. So start with what you can control. Traditional therapies are very important. SLP, OT, PT, behavioral therapies. These traditional therapies are important, but addressing a child's underlying health status is a key first step. We can help these children and individuals and simultaneously vote for a cleaner planet for our future generations. Aim for small and sustainable changes that have great impacts on your family, and be mindful and intentional with your spending habits. See your spending as a vote for the world that you want to see. This can improve your entire family's health, but also the world around us. I know that's a loaded statement. I recognize that, and I promise that I'll continue to elaborate across all of my content and media. I think it's empowering that each of us continue to see each purchase as a vote that we're casting. For example, when I buy organic produce, I'm voting for organic farming practices, and I am consuming less agricultural chemicals. When we choose organic and or pasture-raised animals, we are voting for better animal welfare, and we're also getting better nutrient intake from healthier animals. Yes, it may be more expensive in the store. It's true. However, studies have shown that organic produce and healthier animals who are raised as that animal should be raised, they have increased nutrient qualities. They have different nutrient profiles. No poorly tested toxicant chemicals, lower agricultural pesticide, herbicide, agricultural product residues, better nutrient density. So you can see that as you choose to see these purchases as preventative, you can choose to see these purchases as preventative healthcare. Another example is that you could choose to buy unscented hygiene and household products, meaning you're flipping the product over and you're looking at the fine print in the ingredients of your hygiene and your household cleaners, your household products, to see if it says fragrance or perfume or cologne. And get rid of those. Get rid of those products slowly but surely as they run out. But like if it's perfume or Febreze, you guys literally just throw it away. Seriously, I know that's like, no, I don't want to. If it really pains you to do it, let the bottle run out and then change to essential oils and a cleaner, greener option. But I think one of the most profound things that you can do, the step one to going low tox in your home, is to get these products that have fragrance in them out, because the word fragrance alone can be thousands of chemicals that they don't have to adequately test for safety, and they don't have to label them because they get looped in under one word, fragrance, and it's a proprietary, formula, they call it, so they don't have to label all the ingredients. There are so many frugal options that you can do, like for cleaning your house. For example, baking soda, white vinegar, salt, and lemons, and rubbing alcohol and hydrogen peroxide. Ooh, that was quite a mouthful. But you can use these as more frugal options for cleaning your home in the time being, while you are transitioning to less toxic ingredients. And we will get into low tox living and in further content for sure. But if you're interested to know what I use a product called Branch Basics. I still do use some of my own DIY cleaning supplies at home with some of the ingredients that I just listed out. But for the most part, I use Branch Basics now to clean my home, which is an awesome option for families who are trying to be more mindful, or if you've got someone in your house that is more sensitive, whether it's you or your children, or like I said, maybe you're just trying to be more mindful and use less toxicant ingredients. Branch Basics, I have a discount code on my website on speakingofhealthandwellness.com. That's what I use to clean so much in my house. It's like replaced several products of mine. But you see where I'm going with this whole point, though, about using holistic nutrition and low toxicant living. It's about our daily routines and our decisions about what goes into and onto our bodies. When it comes to overhauling your child and family's diet, nutrition, and lifestyle, have grace with yourself. It is a process. A marathon, not a sprint. Start with what feels manageable and where the most impact will be. In episode 3, I talk about holistic nutrition and give some starting strategies if you are just getting started with this holistic nutrition journey. I talk more about the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 and how you can really get started on your holistic nutrition journey. So if you haven't checked that one out, I definitely recommend you do if this is something that is intriguing to you or you would like to learn more about. But yeah, start with feels manageable and where there'll be the most impact. So if, for example, if your child is struggling with hyperactivity or aggression or rage or meltdowns or sleep issues, you might consider first looking at removing artificial flavors and artificial dyes and colors and preservatives and flavor enhancers, etc. And then slowly over time move towards buying only certified organic processed foods and so forth as you work towards getting more of those whole food, nutrient dense foods into your child's diet. So many parents from around the world are seeing incredible progress and improvement in their children and families' health conditions by just changing their nutrition and lifestyle habits. I have seen nutrition and lifestyle create miraculous changes in children that therapies alone cannot account for. Think on it. Do you function at your best when you're not well? No, of course not. We are all functioning optimally and at our best when we are at our healthiest selves. And when we work to address their underlying biology and their health, many children with neurodevelopmental disorders and special needs can experience rapid progress that then supports the therapy and the educational strategies that they are working on. And while I personally know children who have lost their diagnosis, nutrition and lifestyle interventions are not a miracle cure-all. It's not this miracle cure-all, but they are certainly a foundational concept that we need to collectively take into account for each of these children and individuals as we move forward. Changing your family's diet and lifestyle can be overwhelming, especially if you're parenting a very selective, complex, picky eater. Just remember that you don't have to change everything overnight, and you do not have to do it alone. Start small and go at your pace. And if you're looking for community support, we're building a community of like-minded people across my social media, of families who have already seen remarkable changes in their children through diet and lifestyle changes, and they're sharing their experiences. You can come join us in our Facebook community group. It's free. It's linked in the show notes. You can follow along at Speaking of Health and Wellness on Instagram. And also, don't hesitate to reach out to check out the coaching options that I have on speakingofhealthandwellness.com. If you think that we might be a good fit to work together for distance coaching, I do offer complimentary discovery calls to ensure that we are before there are any sorts of commitments, and I'm here for you. And I would be honored to support you and your child and your family's health journey in any capacity, whether it is through my free content, through the group, through this podcast, through distance coaching, what have you. I am honored to support you in your child's journey through all of this. Check out episode 3 for more information on holistic nutrition, and check out the blogs that I've written on speakingofhealthandwellness.com if this information intrigues you or resonated with you and you are interested in diving deeper into the literature that supports this information. Thank you very much again for taking the time to listen to all of this today. I hope that you have a spectacular rest of your day and that this has supported you. Until next time, take care and talk soon.